Disclaimer: this story contains mature emotional themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The night was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the rain against the window. I slipped into the dimly lit room, the warmth of the lamp casting golden light across his face. He looked peaceful, half asleep, his hand resting loosely by his side. I told myself I wouldn't wake him, I'd just slip under the covers and rest, nothing more. But as I moved closer, the mattress dipped, and his breath changed. My heart skipped, a steady rhythm suddenly uneven. His eyes opened slowly, dark and steady, meeting mine in the silence. The air felt charged, thick with the kind of tension you can't quite name but can definitely feel. I froze, caught between a laugh and a breath. His voice was low, rough from sleep. "You're cold," he murmured, the corner of his mouth lifting in that almost smile that always made me lose words. Before I could reply, his hand brushed mine, light, unhurried, deliberate. The simple touch sent a rush of warmth up my arm. My pulse thundered in my ears. The space between us disappeared before I realized I'd moved. Neither of us spoke. There was only the sound of the rain, the closeness, the quiet promise in the way his eyes lingered on me. And then, he leaned closer. She used to think she knew every part of him, every laugh, every silence, every small habit that made him who he was. But lately, something had changed. It wasn't loud or obvious, it was in the way he stopped finishing his sentences, or how he lingered by the window when he thought she wasn't looking. There were new distances between them, invisible but heavy, like fog. They'd been together long enough to have weathered storms, fights, mistakes, promises whispered into the dark. But this silence felt different. It wasn't anger. It was absence. She missed the way his hand would find hers without thinking. The way they used to talk until dawn about nothing and everything. Now, even when he was next to her, she felt as though they were standing on opposite sides of something unseen. Still, there were moments, flashes of the old warmth, that kept her hoping. Like when his eyes met hers over morning coffee, and for a heartbeat, it felt like time hadn't moved at all. Or when his laugh slipped out unexpectedly, and she felt her chest tighten, remembering why she fell for him in the first place. That night, as rain whispered against the window, she watched him breathe in sleep. The ache in her chest wasn't just longing, it was fear. Fear of what they become, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of wanting too much. When he stirred and reached out, his fingers brushed her arm, a simple, wordless gesture that said, "I'm still here." It was enough to make her heart stumble. He opened his eyes, slow and steady, as if he'd been waiting for her to look back. There was something in his gaze, regret, maybe, or something softer. "You've been distant," he murmured, his voice quiet but sure. Her lips parted, but the words tangled in her throat. "You too," she wanted to say. "We both have." But instead, she just smiled faintly, pretending the air between them didn't hum with everything left unsaid. He reached up, brushed a stray hair from her face, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. The closeness, the quiet, the weight of every unspoken feeling pressed against her chest until she could barely breathe. And just when she thought she might finally say what she'd been holding back, he whispered her name. The next morning, sunlight crept through the curtains, drawing soft lines across the sheets. She stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the world beyond the glass. It should have been an ordinary day, coffee, quiet conversation, routine. But everything between them felt charged, unpredictable, on the edge of something neither could name. He moved behind her, his presence filling the space before his voice did. "You've been distant again," he said, not accusing, but curious, uneasy. She didn't turn around. "Maybe I'm just tired," she murmured, though they both knew it wasn't true. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Her heartbeat quickened, she could hear it in her ears. "Or maybe," he said softly, "you're trying to run from something." That was when her phone buzzed on the table, a name flashing across the screen. Someone from work. Someone he'd never liked. His eyes followed it, and for a split second, something sharp flickered in them, jealousy, raw and unguarded. She caught it. "It's just a message," she said quietly, though her pulse betrayed her calm voice. "I didn't say it wasn't," he replied, his jaw tight, his tone too measured. The air between them grew heavy again, full of words they both wanted to say but didn't. When she finally turned to face him, their eyes met, a collision of hurt, need, and the kind of tension that always seemed to pull them back together, no matter how far they drifted. He looked at her the way he used to, with that mix of longing and frustration, like he couldn't decide whether to walk away or close the distance. Her breath caught as his gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. "Tell me the truth," he whispered. "Do you still want this, us?" She swallowed hard, unable to answer. Because she did, maybe too much. And as silence stretched, their closeness became unbearable, the kind of moment that teeters on the edge of something forbidden, waiting for one heartbeat, one breath, one choice to change everything. The screen fades to black. The evening carried a quiet tension that words couldn't touch. The storm outside had trapped them together, two hearts circling the same silence, pretending not to feel the gravity pulling them closer. She stood by the flickering firelight, the shadows dancing across her face. He watched her from the doorway, torn between wanting to speak and knowing that one wrong word could unravel them both. It wasn't supposed to be like this closeness that made it hard to breathe. They'd promised each other space, a little distance to think, but somehow, fate always found a way to close the gap. "Power's out," he said, his voice low, breaking the silence. She gave a soft laugh. "Figures. Perfect timing." Thunder rolled in the distance, the sound vibrating through the walls. She turned toward him, their eyes locking in the dim orange glow. It was supposed to be a simple glance, harmless, but it lingered. Too long. Too knowing. He took a slow step forward. "You've been avoiding me." Her breath caught. "I've been trying to think." "About what?" he asked. "About us," she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath, smell the faint trace of rain on his clothes. The space between them was gone now, replaced by something deeper, heavier. Neither moved. Neither dared. The fire crackled, and the storm raged outside, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. "You can tell me if you've stopped caring," he said, his voice trembling just enough to betray everything he was trying to hide. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering in the firelight. "That's the problem," she said softly. "I never did." The silence that followed was electric, fragile, beautiful, dangerous. And then the lights flickered back on. They froze, both startled, both too close. The tension shattered, hanging between them like a secret neither could take back. The screen fades to black. The silence after the storm was louder than thunder. The fire had burned low, throwing restless shadows across the room. She stood by the window again, arms wrapped around herself, trying to steady her breathing. He was behind her, pacing. The quiet between them had weight, thick with everything unsaid, everything waiting to break. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling but steady enough to cut through the air. "There's something you don't know." He stopped mid-step. "Then tell me." Her fingers tightened around the fabric of her sleeve. "You remember the nights I said I was working late?" His face shifted, confusion, then realization. His voice dropped. "Don't." Tears welled in her eyes. "It wasn't what you think at first. I needed someone to talk to. I was lonely, and you were gone even when you were here." But then, she stopped herself, unable to finish. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his jaw clenched so hard it trembled. So it's true. She took a step forward, desperate. It wasn't love. It wasn't even about him. It was about feeling seen again. He let out a breath, sharp, ragged. You could have come to me. I tried, she cried. You didn't hear me anymore. The room felt smaller now, the air charged with pain and leftover tenderness. He turned back to face her, his eyes glistening, anger and heartbreak colliding in them. For a moment, no one spoke. Just the sound of rain easing outside, the soft crackle of fire, and two people realizing the ground beneath them had already given way. Then, quietly, he said, "He's still in your life, isn't he?" Her silence was the answer. Something inside him broke, not with rage, but with sorrow. I kept thinking we could fix this, he whispered. That we just needed time. But maybe we were already gone. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as it reached for his. I never stopped loving you, she said through tears. He looked down at her hand, so familiar, so fragile, and for a second, he almost took it. Almost. But instead, he stepped back. Love isn't always enough, he said softly. The fire hissed, the light dimmed, and the screen cut to black. Morning light broke through the gray sky, washing the room in a cold, soft glow. The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the storm ever did. She sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Every breath she took felt like it might shatter her. Across the room, he packed his things slowly, methodically, as if each folded shirt was a way to keep himself from falling apart. Neither spoke. There were no more accusations left, no excuses to reach for. Just truth, raw, heavy, unfixable. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were tired, lined with too many sleepless nights. I keep trying to find a version of this where we make it through, he said quietly, but I don't know if I can anymore. Her voice broke. You can't just walk away. Not after everything we've been through. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. You made a choice, he said, not unkindly, but with a finality that felt colder than anger. And now I have to make mine. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent, unstoppable. I didn't mean to lose you, she whispered. I just lost myself. He paused, the weight of her words hitting harder than she knew. For a moment, he looked like he might cross the room, pull her into his arms, and tell her it would all be okay. But he didn't. He just exhaled slowly and set down the last of his things. You still have me in some ways, he said. Just not the way we were. She stood, unsteady. Then tell me this isn't goodbye. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough to remember everything they had been and everything they'd lost. I don't know what it is, he said softly. But it doesn't feel like the end. And with that, he left. The door closed behind him, quiet but echoing. She sank to the floor, her sobs muffled by the silence. Outside, the clouds began to break, sunlight spilling through in fractured beams, a new day, uncertain, but waiting. Days turned into weeks, and the silence that once defined them began to soften. Time, as it often does, worked quietly, smoothing the edges of anger, dulling the sharpness of regret. She threw herself into the rhythm of ordinary life, work, long walks, small conversations that didn't sting. But every now and then, she'd catch herself reaching for her phone, wondering if he still thought about her. He did. Late one afternoon, as the sun began to fall behind the hills, she found herself standing at the old cafe they used to visit. The same corner table, the same soft music playing faintly in the background. She smiled to herself, tracing her fingers over the coffee cup. It felt like remembering a dream. Then she heard it, a familiar voice behind her. You always sit here. She turned. He stood in the doorway, hesitant but smiling in that quiet, uncertain way that had always undone her. The world seemed to still for a heartbeat. "I didn't think I'd see you here," she said softly. "I wasn't sure I'd come," he admitted. "But I guess I needed to know if you still smiled the same way." They sat across from each other, awkward at first, small words, nervous laughs, all the unspoken things filling the spaces between sentences. But gradually, it felt easy again. Familiar. Like breathing. When they stepped outside, the city lights had begun to glow. The air was cool, touched by the scent of rain. He stopped, turning to face her. "I've been angry," he said quietly. "Hurt. But underneath all that, I never stopped caring." Her eyes glistened. "I didn't either." For a moment, they just stood there, the world fading around them. Then, slowly, he reached out, not in desperation, but with the gentleness of someone choosing to begin again. She took his hand, fingers trembling, and in that simple touch, the past began to heal. No grand promises. No dramatic words. Just two hearts, still a little broken, but finding their rhythm again. As they walked away together, laughter rising softly into the night air, the camera lingered on their intertwined hands, fragile, real, full of hope. The screen fades to black.